Welcome to Center for International Law. It's our great pleasure today to host Dr. Zhen, who was with CIL for 5 years. Then she went off to WMU, where she has been for 5 years. She's with the Sasagawa Global Institute at the World Maritime University at Malmö. She's going to be speaking to us today about the designation of PSSAs, or I notice you don't have, yes, you don't have the abbreviation. PSSAs in the high seas should be of interest to all those that are concerned about protection of the marine environment, international regulation of shipping through the IMO, and the new 2023 BBNJ treaty. So without further ado, Zhen, take over. She'll speak for 45 minutes or so, and then we'll open it for discussion.
Thanks, Prof. Welcome. Thank you for coming. And it's always a special kind of feeling for me to come back. This is where I start my official academic career, if I don't count my studying times. So I always say that CIL is home. And so for me, it's a added layer of joy to be able to stand here. Not always in the role of sitting and admiring other speakers. So it's good for me to share some of the work that I've done, probably accumulating from different times. So the topic, as Prof mentioned, is designating PSSA on high seas. PSSA, particularly sensitive sea area. The one thing that I want to probably highlight is there are many ways or many measures that are required to protect the marine environment. And this is only one thing, focusing on shipping impact. So we're talking about international regulations that is mainly developed through IMO. What I wanted to do is to give you a little bit more background on what it is, how it came about, and how to process this measure that can be used. And the last part is probably one of the reasons this high seas got a lot of attention for the past few years, is there's a new treaty, which is probably the most significant development for the law of the sea during the past 20-some years. And they finally closed one gap that existed on the high seas, which is protecting the biodiversity on the high seas. So shipping regulation is probably setting a broad up thing. Where this is located in the background of international regulation. What is PSSA, how it came about, how IMO is developing this concept, and what is it used for, what are the processes to designating it. And I used 2 examples, which is coming from a workshop that we did last November in collaboration with the regional bodies and IMO to discuss the potential of designating areas that covers the high seas. And the last part is to do a little bit kind of interpretation of what the area-based management tool that's been designated developed under the BBNJ agreement, and what's the linkage with the potential PSSA. So shipping regulations, I think most of you would know that we consider UNCLOS as a constitution for the oceans. What it did is use the rule of reference to incorporate existing and potentially can be developed new rules on different maritime activities. Shipping is the one that probably caught the most attention. If we think about a little bit background of how and when UNCLOS was negotiated, back then the knowledge of the impact of the marine environment was relatively limited. Because if we think about the development of international environmental law, it was almost at the beginning from 1950s, 60s when they started to discuss the potential impact of human interactions with the marine environment. So a lot of the regulations in UNCLOS talking about pollution is thinking about a preventative reduction and control of pollution coming into the marine environment. It's not a system that's designed from the perspective of thinking about the marine environment as environment per se, but more of regulating human interactions with the marine environment. For shipping, it took the same path of rule of reference, designating a competent international organization, even though it only appeared once for the IMO, which was IMCO back then, to consider that to be the competent international organization that helping state to develop, further develop the international regulations. So when we see IMO, it's actually how do I say it? IMO is a secretariat that provides a forum for state to develop this regulations, rules, and standard. IMO doesn't have the authority to develop the rules alone, so it's supposed to be the member state that makes the decisions. So whichever regulations we're discussing or proposing, it's actually discussed among member states, and the decision is made on member states. But they are represented at the IMO from the secretariat and different bodies. So IMO, as a special agent for the UN, it provides the standard setting authority for all aspects. If you look at the history of IMO, it actually has significantly expanded its mandate over the years. It started with 15 technical standards. The Maritime Consultative Organization was their original title, which is only performing services for government to negotiate. But now I think IMO has gone through this phase of be more influential on the direction that their member states are taking, and also facilitating the process along the way. So it has expanded to have more focus on environment as well as security measures. So I think I probably learned this from Prof, which is you always start with the shipping regulation from a disaster perspective, because it kind of gave states the political incentive to negotiate regulations. And for IMO, one of the earliest significant incidents was the Terracanum spill in the 1960s. So for shipping activities and their contact, their interactions with the marine environment is more or less can be grouped on these three elements. Operational discharges, which is through their normal operation that associated with the shipping activities. This is allowed under the legal regulations. And there is accidental or intentional pollution, which is categorized as illegal. For the first categories, is developing different technical standards to minimize these operational pollutions. For incident and incidental or intentional, it is legally regulated or forbidden or prohibited. Physical damages can be both ways. It mainly generated from incidental, but it's also physical contact with the marine environment. So when we see IMO's work on regulating shipping activities, it's mainly through these three elements that look at it. This is not that as comprehensive, but I think I just illustrate what are the measures that IMO has developed over the years. IMO has over 50 binding instruments under its realm, and over 1,000 interpretive guidelines or protocols that is facilitating this regime of regulations. So what we are talking about here is actually at the bottom of area-based management tools or area-based measures. There are a few of them. PSSA could be one of the concepts that actually can incorporate all of these measures. It allows member states to propose any measure that is developed under IMO or has a potential to be adopted by IMO. So what is PSSA? PSSA, interestingly, compared to the other measures that the IMO is developing, it's not based on international convention or any legal document. It's a concept that was discussed in the 1970s in responding to tanker pollutions. And the first one designated was the Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Australia. And it's being extended 2 times, and it has associated measure into it to protect the coral reefs around it. So it has been developed by states sort of through a regulatory perspective instead of come up with any legal conventions as a legal foundation. And this has been accepted by member states, and it continues today. So it has been decided as a special area that needs additional protection because of its recognized ecological, social, economic, or scientific attributes. And these attributes are affected or has a potential to be affected by international shipping activities. So here it's a relatively broad concept, but has a specific focus on shipping regulation. The 3 elements is going to be the key to define whether an area that can be qualified for it. And I want to point out a special one, this social, economic, and scientific attributes, which is much broader compared to the ecological perspective, which is something that we don't normally see in the legal context. So when it comes to the applicable area, that the guideline only said it can be within, beyond the limit of territorial sea. So far, all of them has started with territorial sea going outward. Many of them covering a large area of EEZ. There's only 1 or 2 covered pockets of the high seas, not because they cover a larger area, but in the Mediterranean, because most states don't claim a full 200 nautical miles EEZ. That's how they have a relatively shorter sort of area that under national jurisdiction, hereby they have pockets of high seas that have been covered by PSSA. So at the time of designating PSSA, an important or a requirement is that it has associated protective measures. The designation alone doesn't give a special standard or special title or any kind. It's the protective measure that actually can be implemented to regulate the shipping activities. So for any proposal that's looking at designating a PSSA, they have to identify what is the associated protective measure that will be implemented by the proposing state. So far, it has been the role played by the coastal state. These are perhaps the 3 most relevant guidelines. The submission of proposal will be following the standard IMO document submission, but these 3 are the founding documents to guide state to develop a proposal of this one submitting to the IMO. So the purpose of this is first to guide them through the process, set up a procedure for them to follow. And the other sector is during the process, it has emphasized that for all interest parties to be part of this discussion process. They will not only discuss the potential impact, the other thing is also to do a risk assessment of what are the imposed measures, these associated measures, how can they influence or affect shipping regulation. And that is really going into the shipping community's interest. They have to have them on board for them to support this process and to ensure that they actually comply. So the implementation process is sort of built into the designation process, because if they don't get the shipping company on board or agree with this, you will only have a matter that lies on paper, which probably do not get processed through the shipping activities. The assessment process is done mainly through MEPC because it's under the environment protection. But there are measures which will come later that is traditionally or historically used for safety regulations. It's to provide safety. But by enhancing the safety of navigation, you have a benefit of reducing potential incidents or pollution discharges, and that in a way contribute to the protection of marine environment. So these measures has been incorporated into the protective measures that can be used under the PSSA regime. These are attributes that the area must qualify. So they have been grouped into 3 categories. It's broad enough to cover the elements that they think would have to sort of distinguish this area to be special. And we have seen a lot of overlap with this ecological criteria under CBD, under the fishery management, or even the seabed authorities that are coming up with their protected areas, most sensitive areas. Those ecological criteria or the characteristic of this area is quite well established through different scientific communities. And for any proposal that's designating an area to under the PSSA realm, they have to meet this. And the other sort of connection between different regimes, which they need to probably cooperate a little bit better, is for CBD, for fishery, FAO, or ISA, for them to really consider how to align the criteria. So how one designation of one protected area under one regime can be used to support each other's activities. The scientific education criteria and the social, cultural, economic is, like I mentioned, is one of the unique ones. It overlaps with, for example, the World Heritage List of how they're designating heritage sites. It's didn't appear in the shipping regulation until the PSSA concept. So if it's supporting human dependency for the coastal area, that can be a factor that to be considered why you need special protection. And scientific education, for example, if it's monitoring impact from climate change, monitoring the changes of ocean currents, those things can be taken into consideration. So I give a couple of examples of the ecological criteria because it linked to the two sites that we're going to discuss on the high seas. Is the requirement is that for the whole area, there must be one criteria that is represented in this particular area. The other thing to compensate that is it doesn't mean that the criteria will be applied throughout the whole area. For example, in the Hawaii, the one that has designated, they have different categories of which area fits which category, which criteria in that particular area. What it guarantees is all the area that is covered under the PSSA concept has one criteria that fits into it. But it doesn't mean that you have to be consistent throughout, which made it relatively easier for them to justify it. So for the ecological criteria, uniqueness or rarity that is one of its kind. For example, the SAC-SOC we're going to look at later, it's called the floating rainforest of the Pacific, which is that you don't discover that in any other area around the ocean. And whether it's also rare in terms of occurring only in a few occasions or seriously duplicated in its range. For diversity, spawning, and breeding grounds, and this is also quite important for these two rounds because we have large number of migratory species, and for the spreading and their breeding grounds, this is where they sort of start and finish in their life circle. If that particular area is particularly sensitive or vulnerable to shipping activities, this can be justified as one of the criteria to support their proposal. The other thing that is, because we are talking about shipping regulation, the important thing to demonstrate is these attributes, these vulnerabilities of this area are actually being affected or could be affected by shipping regulation, by shipping activities. If we have an area that is significantly important, but there's no ship around, there's no need to propose any shipping regulations. So one of the key things, which is also the two sides that must demonstrate, is these attributes, these scientifically or ecologically, economically important features that the area has, is actually threatened by shipping activities. For the high seas, one of the most difficult thing is most of the shipping route does not go around on the high seas as much. It's not like the Singapore Strait, you have thousands of ships on a daily basis. Some of them probably see a few hundred year-round or monthly round. So how do you put the bar to say that this level of shipping activity is actually significantly influencing this character that I'm trying to protect? This is something that any proposing, this is government, so any states that have to justify to sell your story to the others, because this has to be discussed among all member states to IMO. They have to agree that this level of threat is actually worth adopting a special regulation to it. So to demonstrate the vulnerability, the proposal must include what kind of shipping activities we're talking about, whether it's cargo, tanko, to what size that is, and what kind of activities that is considered threatening for this particular criteria they're trying to protect. For evidence, other evidence to suggest is that whether there have been past incidents, how do you justify that, and what are the stressors that this area is facing, whether how is the proposed measure can significantly contribute to the protection of this area. So those are the two key things that the proposal must include. First, demonstrate that the area is significant, identify what criteria they are trying to protect, and establish the linkage between these vulnerabilities and shipping activities. The next step is to identify what are the regulatory measures that we're proposing. Are we talking about reduce of speed, area to be avoided, traffic lanes, or precautionary, recommendatory? whether it's mandatory measures or recommendatory voluntary measures we are discussing here. So the requirement is that this has to go through the process of IMO discussion and approval. This means that any existing measures that is under IMO's authorization or can be approved as existing IMO instrument, or it could be developed, has a potential that falls under the mandate of IMO that state can discuss through IMO's forum and establish the new regulations. The last one is they put sort of a leeway for any other measures could be identified, and this goes to some of the measures that are included in the UNCLOS. So I put a few examples, and probably I'll go a bit faster on what they are and how they can be used in the PSSA concept. I mentioned that PSSA sort of becoming an overarching title, that all the measures that being adopted separately by IMO instrument can be sort of branded into it. Special areas and emission control, which is under MAPO, and other tools. SOLAS on this routing traffic separation used to be the safety of navigation measures. Now has been incorporated into the PSSA concept to really on the managing of reducing of incidents, collision, and all that, to be listed on the World Heritage Site, declared as other regional measures, is something I mentioned about the regime interaction or how they can support one another. The APSA criteria that under CBD, the fishery vulnerable fishing grounds under FAO, or regional fishery regulations, so they can be considered as supporting one another's application and use it as a support for different regulations adopted under the other regimes. Special areas under MAPO, this came in the 70s, which MAPO is the one that's setting up all the technical standard for both deal with operational and incidental discharges. So these are applied across the international shipping regulation all at the same. The aim is to set up a level playground that everyone can meet the minimum requirement of shipping regulation of MAPO. So flag state has authority to set up a higher standard, but for international regulation, IMO decide on the minimum that can be implemented by port state, by flag state, and coastal state as well. So if we look at international regulation or from the technical perspective, a lot of times it's always meet in the middle. So there will always be people way ahead of the curve. They can, with the new concept of green shipping and all that, there are a lot of more technically developed companies, countries, they can perform much better. There will always be those underperformed ships. So for international regulation, most of the time they sort of meet in the middle. And there will be people to you need to catch up and to meet the standard to ensure that the ship can sail internationally. But most of the time, it is the minimum standard for all international shipping across the borders. For MAPO, so they have this minimum standard, but there will be areas that perhaps will be suffer even more if we apply the same standard. So if the coastal state can justify for technical reasons in relation to their oceanographic ecological conditions and for the particular shipping pattern for the traffic things, they can adopt a stricter measure, which is mandatory to apply for this identified shipping traffic in that specific area. So this is the concept come up with MAPO, is that within this minimum discharge standard, there will be even stricter rules, but apply for a designated area alone. And special area, again, it can encompass different maritime zones. It can be because we have this oceanographic characters can strap borders. These are the man-made lines between maritime boundaries, and the ocean is a connected one. So there will be occasions that different states need to come together to collaborate with the protection of a specific sea area. And it must demonstrate that the general requirement doesn't provide adequate protection for it. The other important thing to note with this is because if we're talking about discharge, not discharge certain things at sea, we have to deal with what happens next. And the requirement for any special area to become effective is for the port state to provide the adequate port reception facilities for receiving these discharges. So there are also certain overlaps between the criteria, that's how to designate special areas and under MAPO. And this is, I think, like I mentioned before, it covers only oceanographic economic conditions. It didn't mention social, economic, or the education, human impact for it. So this is purely looking at the protection from the pollution perspective for the environment. Long distance effect. So far, I have a list later. We have over 24 different areas subject to different annex, because MAPO has 6 annexes. And for Mediterranean, for example, it is subject to several different annexes for garbage, for oil discharges, or toxic environment. Overall, we can see probably we don't have any of these things in where we stand. Doesn't mean that it shouldn't be, but I think this could be something that we can think about why we haven't proposed any of these shipping regulations in one of those most dense shipping activities in the world, in Asia Pacific areas. Special area was traditionally those 5 annexes. From 1997, IMO actually adopted emission control Annex 6. So we have a special one called emission control areas. So far we have 4 designated ones. This one will be highly linked to air emission, and also in the future, perhaps for the GHG discharges as well, will fall under. They are not necessarily the most well implemented ones yet. Annex 6, it has the least ratified state, over 97 or something. It's the newest one, and the requirement is either to shift through different fuel or you collect it before discharges in port. So I have a list of where other areas are, and IMO actually does pretty good publication of the measures and things they adopt. And the only thing is they actually charge you for purchasing it. But my understanding is 2 elements for it. One is the money goes to technical cooperation. It's actually quite a significant contribution to that program. The second is they provide access to this to member states. So it's only the shipping company, academics that are purchasing it. So for this, depending on whether what is the category of the attributes that we discussed with PSSA, so they can also use discharge standard to protect the PSSA. The area-based tools, I think we're most familiar with this in the Strait of Malacca and Singapore, which is the shipping traffic separation scheme and different routing measures that can be designated. For safety measures, I think this is also quite creative, and we have seen several proposals under the PSSA concept are purely adopting the traffic routing measures and traffic separation scheme, which means they started to sort of overlap these 2 regimes, maritime security, safety, and marine environment protection. So I said this proposal first go to MEPC, but for any of these measures file under SOLAS, it will be further discussed through MSC. And so when any proposal coming in that you have to really consider a different schedule, there's a whole requirement of 12 weeks to submit before the major meeting. So if a proposal contains both MEPC and MSC consideration, you have to really timing the proposal to ensure that you can get into it at an early stage. So area to be avoided, the traffic separation lanes are typically known for SOLAS measures. The last one I want to mention is there's a category for any measure that has identified legal basis. And I took up 2 examples from UNCLOS. First one is the shipland and traffic separation scheme. Those 2, I consider them quite interesting because the coastal states here only said that they have sea land and traffic separation. They don't have to go to IMO. But the practice has become that states will go to IMO regardless, whether it's within their territorial sea. There have been examples or discussions that the coastal state actually proposing measures within internal water connecting out way to that, they still go to IMO. I think IMO has earned its reputation of being the authority to designate regulation for international shipping. And this process somehow has consolidated into a belief that they should go to IMO to do this ship land and traffic separation scheme within territorial sea. The second one is, which both Dwellos and IMO has used to justify the concept of PSSA, especially when it comes to the EEZ. The special area that is under Article 211(6), which says that if specially clearly defined area within the EEZ for its recognized reasons in relation to oceanographic ecological condition, which is a standard term for MAPO, because they were negotiated and developed around the same time in the 70s, as well as utilization or protection of resources that are threatened by shipping traffics or other measures, and the coastal state can adopt special mandatory measures for the prevention of pollution, which is shipping regulation. And again, the focus is mainly on which, oops, sorry, my bad. How do I go back to? The shipping regulation is mainly focusing on prevention of pollution.
You're only on slide 20. So if you've got 56, you better speed up if we want to have discussion.
Okay. That's what I asked before. How long should I? I think the main thing I want to point out is the criteria for education, economic, and cultural is really created by IMO rather than having a strong foundation within UNCLOS. So, but this has somehow become accepted by the member state, and they have proceeded as accordingly. Those are the two things which I consider IMO sort of expanded its mandate through practice. The procedure, I think I will just highlight that it must be submitted by governments and have demonstration of where the special attributes that exist, and it's a threat to shipping, and the state can find suitable protective measures. And this must be submitted to MEPC for its consideration. Proposal, I'll come back to it when I discuss those two proposed areas. Currently, we have 18 PSSAs. The newest one is with the Mediterranean Sea that covers, as I said, the pocket of high seas. You can find all the information online. And the benefit of designating PSSA, I think the most important thing is to raise awareness of the significance of the area. And it can tailor a specific protective measures to regulate the threats to shipping in that. How effective are they? I think the one thing that IMO has MEPC people has trying to do is to do this review. It is a review monitoring process built into the guidelines, but this has never been invoked yet. So specifically, if we're talking about statistics, we don't really know how effective are they. Some of them, we gather data from different satellite image, International Fishing Watch, and all that. And the thing is, by and large, most of the time we would see that shipping traffic actually follows the guidelines that is adopted by the IMO. So these two examples I give, one of the Galapagos archipelago outside of Ecuador. It's a group of islands, and the proposed measures are mandatory shipping reporting, traffic separation. The second one is something I thought it would be interesting to test who can pronounce it. Papahana Mukauka, the national monument. You've been to Hawaii. So this is significant because it's one of the only ones actually built into a cultural heritage because of indigenous people's connection with the oceans. And this could be an example for people to consider in the Pacific, for example, or the Caribbeans. They have different interpretation of human relationship with the ocean. And so again, we see that after the designation from 2007, this was data from 2016, and the ships actually by and large generally follow the recommendations, regulations. So now coming to the high seas, the map that is well known, that produced by Pure Trust, that highlighted these 10 high sea spots that deserves better protection because they are largely sort of in a non-governance perspective. And we're thinking about protecting the high seas, all the standard we threw out, like 20-30% designated areas, marine protected areas, under the BBNG as well as the CBD conventions. If we don't talk about the high seas, which covers over 64% of the water surface, there's no way that we can achieve this target. So the two sites that was under discussing is one here, Costa Rica Thermal Dome, and the other one is the Sargasso Sea in the North Atlantic. So the thermal dome is quite a unique feature in the northwest of the Central America. What happens is because of the current and the circular winds, it actually become a whole area that has this interconnection between the horizontal movement. So it actually brought up the cold water from the deep ocean bottom all the way up, and it forms a circulation around this whole area. Because of this nutrient brought up, what happens, it has a more diversified marine life within, and it's both support the local community as well as the commercial fisheries. It's not only the connection with the human that is important, it's also because it supports the large biodiversity around the ocean. It's a spawning ground for many of these cactuses and sharks around the region. And I'll probably just leave you a few minutes to have a better look at it. I borrowed a map from Aviva. I thought it had a lot of information in it. I won't be cover it, but I just want to demonstrate scientifically importance and their connections through the local community and the coastal area. The challenge for this area is that it's not a scientifically defined area. It moves with the current. So throughout the year, the most biologically important area actually expands, shrinks depending on the season and the current with the migration route of different species. The other challenge is that this is quite a complicated area. We have cases between membrane states delimitation as well as the submission to the CLCS on outer continental shelf. There are a lot of political influence into it. So when we talk about protections, and this is not just the high sea pockets we're talking about because they're all connected with the current through into the EEZ of the coastal state. So straddling through Guatemala, I think we are, depending on how you are familiar with this, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and this is Nicaragua going down to Costa Rica and Panama. So each of them have a certain coverage of their EEZ. Panama is a little bit outside, but because of the Panama Canal, so a lot of shipping lines actually going through that. So Panama has also been playing a significant role in discussing the protection of the thermal dome. The high seas area, it varies, but in general, there's a study that shows that it covers 500,000 kilosquare meters and has been the feeding and breeding ground for many of the marine species. So this is just the importance of these two sites, kind of a general introduction. The Sargasso Sea, I think some of us might have heard presentations. I think CIO organized David Tripp. He's devoted his retirement to protect the Sargasso Sea, which is what I mentioned as a golden floating rainforest of the ocean. So I will also leave some time for you to read. Sargassum is a different category depending on where it occurs. So for this Sargasso Sea that we are talking about, it's actually supporting more of a marine life. in a little bit down under, here is another, scientifically speaking, there are two different types of sargassum in this. So Sargasso Sea has this unique spread of the sargassum, which is the floating algae in this, and on the southern part of the Atlantic, all the way stretched into Africa, west of Africa, there's a different species of sargassum, and that it's not consistent, they are not connected, but they float with the current. What happens is they often get washed up into the Caribbean island, and that becomes a local problem. And so people's attitude when discussing protection of sargassum is actually quite different in that region, and depending on where we are talking about. So for this particular focus on the Sargasso Sea, the map that I took is also the other significance of Sargasso Sea is it has a NGO, or how do I, civil society, how do I define it? Sargasso Sea Commission that assumes the stewardship or protection. It's not international organization. It's founded or established through a political declaration, Hamilton Declaration in 2014. The signature government is actually making a political pledge that they want to preserve and protect the biodiversity of this area. But this is such a how do I say, it's also a political consideration into it. So when they did the discussion of how to protect this area, Sargasso Sea is probably covering the lighter area, which is much bigger. And because they don't want to get into any political situation, the area of collaboration is actually designated fully on the high seas. It excluded, which this is Bermuda and overseas territory of the UK, excluded the EEZ of Bermuda, and also it finishes with the boundaries of different Pacific Island states. So this whole area of collaboration is on the high seas. And the existing, not managing, that's why I find difficulty how to categorize Sargasso Sea Commission. It's NGO that have support from different governments, and what they do is try to facilitate different research work and how they can protect this area. A recent development is these two regions actually joined force, and they got quite large funding support from these three, mainly French and also World Bank support, to study what are the most adequate or sufficient governance system to protect these two areas. And they started with the basic scientific study, which is analyzing the importance of this ecosystem. What are we actually discussing? What need to be protected? How important it is for the human community? What are the threats to their existence? And how they can protect to it. So the two sites are supported by Maviva, which is a research institute, and Sargasso Sea Commission, which is an NGO, and a university, which is the research institute, to start this program. And for this, under the strategic action plan, they're actually discussing how they can work with different international regime. And the proposal to designate the two sites as PSSA came from this new development. Sargasso Sea tried 10 years ago, but they didn't have enough scientific support, and as well as identify what are the shipping regulations that need to be protected. So for these two sites that they need to discuss how they want to propose this PSSA proposal, a few important things for them to think about is how do they define the protected area? Because when we're talking about shipping regulation, for ship to be alert how they should behave in certain area, is where is the boundaries for these measures? And what are the recognized attributes, which is relatively easy for them to justify because they have been designated at APSA and the CBD, a fishing ground under FAO. The important thing is how to demonstrate the traffic character actually threatening this important ecological system, and what would be the suitable APMs, potential protective measures that can be proposed. The last thing is a little bit linked to the thing we're going to discuss on BBNG is who would be the government that want to take the lead for them if we're talking about an area that is based on the high seas. So with this background that we had a workshop last November with IMO support through their cooperation mechanism. We had Maviva and SAC both participating, and they have really good connection with the Latin American regions. They brought all the member states that from Maritime Port Authority, MFA, Coast Guard, and to discuss this process, and also more to understand what is PSSA, what can it do, what cannot it do, because we're only talking about shipping regulations. There are also other stressors threatening the two sides, climate change, other plastic pollution, for example. I think this is interesting because it demonstrates it's a consultation process for these two sides to start a discussion. What we have included both mainly from the public sector, but we also have not practice sector actually, NGOs, IMO, academia, and all the others to participate to it. So it's more of a starting consultative process for this to discuss what are the potential for them to discuss this and what are the risks associated with it. Structure of the proposal, I think I'll skip some of it and just to go through the protective measures, because I think designating an area doesn't mean anything unless you really have a suitable protective measures. So for them to develop, they need sufficient data, especially coming to support the area. The first thing would be to identify what are the protected areas. Another feature of PSSA is actually allows a buffer zone. So with the Hawaii one, they actually have a buffer zone. The one outside Cuba also have a buffer zone, which is becoming a little kind of precautionary when you come into the core. Significance of the area, we need to, this is something I want to show is the shipping traffic that I mentioned. This is the hardest part. This is also the reason why SAC didn't go through their proposal the first time, is they couldn't justify what are the traffics, how much of the traffic is actually threatening the sea area that they're under discussion. So the lighter the lines go, that means the more indensed shipping traffic. This is the data for 3 years. And we can see clearly there are definitely quite significant shipping transiting through this area. The other one I have is data from 21 showing the variation from different weeks. Okay. The other study that they were trying to justify is how is this level of shipping activities actually affecting this area. The recent study they've done is to look at ship strikes, because this is the physical contact. They have limited funding. What I heard is they couldn't do a comprehensive study of all the impact from this region. And so they picked at shipping strikes at the first. I borrowed this map from a scientist, so he told me that I should use all the sources that justify where the data is coming from. What I understand is all the different lines shows the migratory routes of different type of whales along the years. And the lighting part, this blue part is their feeding and weaning ground, and this area is a breeding ground in the east part of the Caribbean. So all the young whales will start their journey from here all the way going downward and coming back. This is also for eels, for the others migratory species. But this is one type of whale that they did the study. And another study coming from FAO and the Fishing Wars database is they calculated the number of reported strikes within this area. And the largest one, I think, is 31. This fishing region is from the data from FAO, so 31. Definite ship strikes is 42, and there are also estimated other ones. What they have found out is depending on the speed of the ship, if it becomes above more than 15 knots per hour, and it has a high chance of more fatal strikes with these animals. So for the potential APMs we discussed at the workshop, what would be a suitable one that's, especially when it's going on the high seas, and what would be a more sort of a low-hanging fruit for the shipping community and the other member state to be able to accept. So we use one example that covers pockets of the high seas. It's only because the state didn't claim full EEZ. So the area is actually already there are a number of existing protective measures. And so what they have done is just to look at the protection of whales in this area to reduce ship strikes. This is proposal done jointly by 4 states, and it took them over a decade to come up with this whole process. So one of the studies shows the fin whale that their concentration about this area. So the proposal is only addressing one type of threat to these marine animals. That is recommendatory measures for ship communities to be more aware, to reduce speed, but this is only recommendatory. They discussed a lot of other traffic separation scheme, but it didn't work out because this is the most quite intense shipping activities area, so they couldn't get the security or support from international community. So what they did was they put the PSSA on the map. The first associated protective measures is only recommendatory, and for shipping companies to be able to follow. And the plan for the French delegation is that they want to see how much this measure is actually contributing to reducing of ship strike first, and they will adopt or further develop the protective measures as they go along. So PSSA, this is another beauty of this, is that when it's designated, there have to be at least one associated protective measures. But once you designate this area, there can be reviewed, revised, and also as time goes by, whether they can change different protective measures under this, which is also all allowed. So I think this is something we mainly discussed during the workshop is who's going to submit, who's going to be consulted, when do you start this whole process, and the reason behind this consultation process. For measures being adopted by IMO, I think one of the important things is to secure international support. Whether we can get enough support at MEPC to adopt this measure. So currently, I think this is not official, but what I heard from the delegates at the workshop is that because the 2 sites that we looked at mainly on the high seas, but they do cover certain EEZ of a member state. So the general understanding is that for them to go through this process, there will be a coastal state become the leading agent or party that cooperate with the others. For the Sargasso Sea, the area of collaboration, they deliberately avoided Bermuda. But this time, the MFA people from Bermuda actually indicated they would consider including the EEZ of Bermuda to start this process. So for them, this will give them a legit role for them to lead the proposal going into IMO. But this goes through UK because they are still overseas territory. For that. So there's going to be extensive internal discussion who's going to lead the way. For the thermal, though, Costa Rica has been playing a major role to lead this, and Maviva has offices in Panama, Costa Rica, and another one I forgot. But Costa Rica's Coast Guard and their Maritime Port Authority are also quite keen on supporting this proposal. The understanding is that this will also cover the EEZ of their neighboring states. So they will be able to do a collaboration in submitting the proposal, so easier to secure success. But the plan for the Sagado project for the next 2 years is to go through all these steps to secure internal support, identify who can submit, and also do a little bit of lobbying at IMO through the process, and to get support from all the other major shipping countries. The last part, I think I might run out of time. 5 minutes?
5 minutes if you can, yeah.
Yes, 5 minutes. I think most of you know the process of BBNJ. The significant thing that we are discussing now is how to speed up the ratification and implementation. We need 60, and currently we have 2. I think it's probably a good start. We just need a little bit more support for that. ABMTs, that is the linkage between this and the PSSA we were discussing. I think one of the significant things to distinguish is for the process going under BBNJ, it should not include any areas within national jurisdiction. So for the PSSA that we discussed, that will be led by a member state that covering their EEZ actually sort of distinguish this themselves automatically. And for these measures to be effective, we're still kind of in the beginning of discussing how and who. I think the difficulty going on to the high seas is that it seems like everyone has a role to play, but it's hard to locate anyone want to take the first initiative. It's the first one that dare to eat a crab, that kind of situation. So we don't know how this will function out. And it has been praised as probably will be the most significant measure to establish marine protected areas on the high seas. But I think there are a lot of challenges that we need to think it through. It has to be submitted by parties, individually or collectively. All the process later on we'll see there's a lot of overlaps with existing framework under PSSA and the CBD and all that. But because they have set up this, not include any areas with national jurisdiction, so there will be a lot of work for them to work out how these different regimes would function within the existing ones and the new ones. So part 3 is the one that set up all the measures that can be adopted, how to guide through the designation of marine protected areas. I think I copy and pasted some of the provisions there. The reason is I want to show that this is potentially quite a useful measure, but we don't really know how this is going to be implemented, especially when it has support from the scientific technology body that is to be established. I think from now until ratification, we're probably looking at 5 years to set up all the institutions that needed to put this through. Probably need another 1 or 2 years. And if we're thinking about submitting a proposal or any kind of discussion, then we're looking at probably 10 to 20 years before a high seas MPA can be designated. So the other kind of message is to start thinking about now how to implement this from the academic perspective, and that could perhaps help to support the implementation in the long run. For the proposal, I think I find this almost similar to the designation of marine protected areas under all the other IMO, for example, is that you have to justify why you need special protection, what are you protecting it from, what are the measures, who's implementing it. And I think going into the high seas or any other discussion is that whatever you do on the high seas, you will need a ship. So we'll go back to IMO. And those will be the connection that I think the designation of the implementation of the ABMTs will should start their discussion with it. But my understanding from the IMO is that when I said that IMO is actually functioning at the secretariat, it doesn't have the authority to make these decisions, is that they haven't got enough indication or suggestion from member states that they want to consider this yet. The shipping industry will always resist more regulations. For them, they don't want to do the burden. It will all come down to the shipping companies or the consumers in the end. So for them, how do they connect these two different dots is going to be the challenging issue for this. So we don't need that. So indicative criteria, I think we can see a lot of overlaps between different things that we look at PSSA or even special areas under MAPO. And this will also, you will find similarities with CBD, FAO, ISA's criteria as well. The last thing I think I want to mention is the regime interaction between different existing frameworks. And this is, I think for me personally, this will probably be my next couple of years of work, is to look at the implementation of BBNJ and how it functions with existing ones. And I'm more familiar with IMO's work, so I think I will start with looking at how IMO will get into the BBNJ's negotiation. I think IMO on some levels hasn't played that significant role in the international ocean setting. They're trying to avoid the whole thing. IMO people doesn't want to talk about the ocean. Ocean people don't care about shipping regulation. So it's a whole dynamic into it. And working with them, that I think on top of all this academic legal discussion, there's a willingness, political consideration, and also how you sort of play the power game with them as well. So in the end, when we look at marine protected areas anywhere in the ocean, there will be a number of overlaps between different regimes. And I think potentially this will be a chance for them to collaborate more or finding better ways to look at the marine environment in a more comprehensive, holistic view, rather than saying that I'm doing my own thing. I don't become so territorial about it. And I think the proposed ABMTs under BBNG has both its strengths and weakness. It all depends on how states choose to implement them. And through the process, I think Singapore played a significant role in developing this agreement. And I'm not sure or want to point to anything whether Singapore want to continue its leadership in promoting the implementation of the process. This is something to think about. So some final observations. I think both sides have been a little bit step ahead compared to the other high seas hotspot in terms of collaboration and managing. They have two leading organizations that are willing to take the first step. The other thing is how to secure their proposal, gather all the data they need, justify why they're proposing what they are proposing, and to secure international support for this. So I think I'll finish here. I'm a little bit over time, but thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me start by commenting questions, I guess. One thing I think you should have shown is a clear designation between the normal shipping routes and the high seas PSSAs. Distinguish between fishing vessels, which are normally not governed by the IMO,
Yeah.
and your commercial ships. I'd like to know to what extent your major commercial ships are on sea lanes through these areas, because you're going to get a great deal of pushback.
Yeah.
If you try to control the routes of it. And then the question is how much, if you routed the commercial ships around there, how much longer would the journey take? How much more would they be polluting the environment, etc.? So I think my second comment is I think that the IMO's position on this, my guess is likely to be anything that's going to affect shipping in a PSSA must go to the IMO. And that whatever's done under the BBNJ cannot undermine the existing institutions. Therefore, states are going to have to make the proposal. They're going to have to say exactly what the threats are and what APMs they are proposing.
Yeah.
And it'll have to get support.
Yeah.
Now, the NGOs don't count very much. It's going to be states. So if you propose and you don't have the US and UK behind you and the small Caribbean countries, good luck. But I think that is where we're going on this. And the question is, to me at the IMO, it's probably going to go to the NCSR first, the subcommittee.
Yeah.
But my guess the proposal like this will have to go through not just MEPC, it's going to have to go through the Maritime Safety Committee as well, because it affects the regulation of shipping.
Yeah.
And if you don't get approval of both those committees, it's dead in the water. So it is going to be a long process, but I think the NGOs are going to find that unless they get powerful states to back them, they may have observer status at the IMO, but they're going to be observing. They're not going to be driving.
Thanks, Prof. You're right on, where the money is, because the data that I showed is actually from the Jeff money that they did, but they don't have enough support to gather all the data. For the thermal dough that I understand, they probably only calculated a few hundred of ships that are going through the really hot spot, but this is mainly because they don't have data. So the Sagador project, the major thing where the money going is to get all the data of shipping from commercial shipping, from fisheries, and to really understand what are the impacts from this shipping lens. And you're also right with the proposal going into MEPC and how they, or NIMC, who's going to support them. So I said that, so during the workshop, we had both UK, US, Canada, the signatory to the Hampton Declaration. Their representative were there, but they also shared that this is going to be a political thing for them to propose, because they are, for the area that is proposing, they are on the high seas. For them, they don't really want to be the first to do this. And I think the reason we organize this workshop is sort of starting this consultative process for them to understand what this is, what they can do, what they cannot do. And I think the key thing for both sides that they are proposing to do is to gather data first, to understand whether a shipping regulation proposal is necessary for them and how they're going to demonstrate. I think one of the things the French delegation mentioned is how do you sell your story, is how do you get people to support you. It's quite important in the lobby.
You need states to support you.
But there's still people that are doing the work.
And a lot of the states are driven by at the IMO are driven by they're driven by the Ministry of Transport and the Marine Department.
Yeah.
And the commercial shipping has a big say. So if you can route shipping around a given area at a certain season because of potential whale strikes, they might go along with it. But if you want to route shipping around a huge area, I think you're going to run into fantastic
That's exactly
opposition.
what happened with the newest one, Mediterranean, Northwest Mediterranean one, because they consider a number of the traffic separation schemes and area to be avoided and all that. But during the consultation process, all of this were killed because the shipping cannot accept that. There are also a large number of recreational ships which runs at high speed in that area. So their reduce of speeds proposal didn't get through with them as well. And some of those, even if they get through, some of the regulation wouldn't apply to these recreational shipping things. So instead of doing a really mandatory kind of speed reduction measure, they went for this recommendatory. They have 7 different items looking at how shipping companies and the community and the local traffic support station in the neighbor countries, how they can support to raise awareness of which are the seasons that they may be more alert, and what are the shipping hotspots that they shouldn't go high speed. But all of this become recommendatory. And I think for them, it took them over a decade to get this whole process done. The one of the major block was the political fallout between France and Italy, because the French delegation used a map showed was it a territorial sea boundary or something that the Italian government didn't recognize. So they walked away from the consultation whole process and stopped for more than 5 years before they were able to get them back again. So the political differences among different member states, how they're going to propose it, is going to be quite important. Where this sectoral project is going at the moment is to really consolidate with their neighboring states, because the political situation in Central America and Latin America are quite different, I understand. So to get their Port Authority, MFA people on board is the thing that we are going to first, to secure political support from neighboring countries before they're going into the international process.
Okay, just to emphasize, fishing vessels and recreational vessels are normally exempt from IMO regulations. They're really talking about commercial ships.
Yeah.
Okay, let's open it for